Okay, we're going to talk today about, in 7 minutes, about disability services, or trying to meet the needs of students with disabilities. I would think everybody in this room has had a student with a disability. You probably have lots of things that pop in your head when I say that. So I'm going to be brief and go over it. I'm going to try to give you some real world of information, but there's no way I can cram all that in 7 minutes. So we'll have questions afterwards. I could probably speak all day about this subject because it's kind of one I'm a little bit passionate about. But I will just kind of embarrass, I have 3 of my AmeriCorps members here today, national service, we're in the back corner back there. But I do a lot of our youth young adult programs, youth and young adults with and without disabilities. Some of them are college students here and some of them are not. So they're going to kind of help me today. So I titled this Meeting Everyone's Abilities. First I wanted to show, do y'all think this is busy? PowerPoint. Be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's very busy. But it's pretty though, right?
No.
You don't like it? I thought it was cool because it's different. All right. You're not going to ask her anything else. But it's different. I like it. I like that. But it is busy. Okay. So I want you to get in the mindset, a student with a disability, and don't be stereotypical when I'm talking about every student who has blindness or every student who has a hearing deficit or who is deaf or has a physical. I'm just talking about it in general. And I'm talking about learners. So we're talking about abilities. So it's very busy. We got 2 sets of, but from a screen reading opportunity for a student who maybe can't see it, it does go from left to right, and it would do basic accessibility. Just put a couple of my actions of foundational key to success. If you inspire, dream more, learn more, you'd be a great leader. But it is very busy. And then a lot of times we go to presentations, people love those transitions from one slide to the next. Those can be very busy. So this is what not to do for a lot of this. And then I'm going to show you another one. But today, real quickly, we're going to kind of look at some best practices and some real world tips and tricks. All right, I work for the Institute of Disability Studies. Is this busy? Yeah, it's very busy. But these are some of the people I work with. This PowerPoint, when you go to Microsoft and go to PowerPoint, you have a lot of different styles you can use from. Does everybody pretty much use PowerPoint or some of the other technologies? Okay, use what's available there. When you start going to the website and start pulling down, this is from the Microsoft website, you start going to, because I liked it because it was kind of cool. But I picked it to show you because it's different. It's not as accessible as the ones that are built into PowerPoint already. I'm not saying it's not accessible, it's not as much accessible. So you have to be careful when you pick some of that. And then when I add pictures to the top, that changes a lot as well. Yes, sir?
Is it possible to shut those lights off?
Shut the lights off. We will see. I don't know. I mean, oh, I really don't fall asleep. Okay. So I work for USM, University of Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. We're not going to get into all this, but just y'all have all this information. We work with people with disability across the spectrum. Of course, those in college certainly count. Okay, what about this slide? What's your reactions to this slide? Good, bad, accessible? Too many words. Way too many words. Okay. And think about you who out there who doesn't put a lot of information on one slide. This is a good definition from the law, but we could cut half of this out easily. This is a video, I'm not going to show it, but on this video, and I really just want to say it, and I can send this to you guys, but it's good to kind of sometimes, I know you get busy, I know y'all get stressed out, I know you're doing research, you're doing community service, you're teaching 2, 3, 4, 5 classes, whatever the case may be. Some of you teach classes with 100 students, some of you teach with 20. So who am I to even talk to you? I'm adjunct faculty, I'm the A word. But I'm a trainer in real life, and this is the area I do research and study as well. So I've been teaching, 8 to 10 years, and I've taught in several different departments on campus. In the last 2 years, 3 years, China Family Studies, I teach online courses 2 a semester. So I've learned a lot, and it's very dynamic, and online is completely different than in person. So I have to reteach myself a lot as well. Oh, and then my contact information, and then some of my young leaders, and some of them are back today. So let me pull up the one that you got a copy of today. And then so we can get to the meat a little bit more. Okay, in the world of disability services, when we talk about college students, online learning has been the focal point the last few years. That's what everybody focuses on. That's kind of what I was talking about, PowerPoints. That can be in person as well. So that's a huge area. Captioning videos, I'm sure some of you guys have had questions or concerns with that. That's a huge area, but it goes much beyond that, from even how you set your classroom up and to how you provide some of your services. So why do we want to think about accessibility? So what I challenge you is to get beyond. Go ahead and set your class up to be as accessible as possible to meet all learners. Don't get into the disability word. Set your class up to be as successful as possible so you reach everybody, because some students are better at visual, audio, it just depends. So we got all different types of learners. It improves your instruction and it just improves learning overall. Get to know who's familiar with Office of Disability Accommodations. Everybody should be raising their hands. ODA, every one of your syllabi is going to have, if a student with a disability needs accommodations, they're going to contact ODA. Susie Abear, Scott, and Karen are wonderful. And I will say, put a plug in for them, we're kind of known, USM in the disability world is known as a college who really does a lot for students with disabilities. Who knows how many, nobody from ODA is here, how many students with disabilities do we serve on an average every semester? What do y'all think? Just guess.
500.
500? Who thinks that's way high?
236.
236. All right, give me one more. Do I have 237, 238?
5,000.
She actually hit it on the nail. 5,000. Taylor, we got to get her a prize. 500 students. For a long time, we were in the early hundreds. 3 or 4 years ago, we were around 250 to 300 every semester. We have jumped dramatically in the last 2 years. That's one of the largest amounts in the state. What's the number one diagnosis for a student with disability that receives services through ODA? ADHD by a long mile. When y'all get your accommodations letters, you probably, if you haven't had a student with ADHD, you will at some point, whether you teach online or in person or whatever the case may be. What's the second most behind ADHD? What? Come on, y'all mumbling like students sitting back in class. It's learning disabilities in general, it tends to be. But stereotypically, when people think of students with disabilities in college, what do people think of? The 2 students who use wheelchairs on our campus, or it could be more than 2, 3 or 4 who use a crutch, some type of physical disability, and that's the same around the nation. Those are minority by a long shot. It's more of the other. And then we have the hidden disabilities. Probably the biggest diagnosis that does not use ODA is mental health issues, depression and other mental health diagnoses. As a general rule, they tend to avoid getting the assistance that they might could use, so they get it other way. Okay, so we're going to talk about PowerPoints real quick. A lot of this is common sense, but if not, and I've got a lot of links at the end, but use the signs that are there. We talked about that briefly. Think 6x6 or 7x7. Y'all heard that before. 6 lines, 6 words across. Okay. If you're using 12-point font and you put 6 words across and 6 lines, it's going to show this part of the screen. So then you know, hey, I need to do more. I need to make it bigger. So you usually want to do around a 24-point. You can do smaller. What I'm telling you is best practices, guys. Shoot for the moon. I'm not saying you can't use 18 font or 20 font. But if you're using 12 font, people who are in the very back of the room need to be able to see this, whether they have a disability or not. So the larger it is, the better. So we've got 6 here, no more than 6 across. If you get 7 on one line, nobody's going to shoot you or anything. It's okay. Think screen readers. Screen readers for people who aren't able to read it, and then it reads it for them, Dragon Naturally Speaking. Y'all seen it, right? Who has an iPhone or smartphone? We all have capability now to text. You can just speak it. You're not supposed to do it while you're driving. I see people doing it all the time. They're talking to make it text instead of them having to poke everything. Screen readers are going to go from the top left to right. So just think about that. You need to have a title to let them know what's on the page, and then it's going to go left to right. Can it be read from far away? Avoid overwording. Avoid acronyms. I work for the Institute for Disability Studies. When a screen reader reads this, it's IDS every single time, or it's I period, D period, S period. What the heck does that mean? So we like acronyms in the disability world. We love them. In education, we love them as well. So avoid acronyms. I know that's spelling it out, but it helps those students. So just get in that habit. All right, what do you think about this screen?
Perfect.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Don't raise your hand, but have you ever seen anything like this before? Maybe in one of your classes or a class you attended in college? I do trainings in community all the time, and we've got to be accessible. I see this pretty much weekly. Way too much information. It did have a nice header, and this is just the information about ODA. It's good information, but that wasn't the point. We see this all the time. Number one, it's boring. And number two, it's just way, way, way too much information. Okay, so that's some general ones on PowerPoint that does apply for Microsoft Word, and we could get much more detail. You're gonna have those what if situations. So get with me or get with Susie at Office of Disability Accommodations, because you're like, well, he didn't talk about that. We could go on and on and on. Videos, who uses videos in their class or either online? Do you have captioning on all your videos? Don't answer that. You're supposed to. By law, you're supposed to have captioning, because especially if you're teaching online, a student may or may not even did the disability accommodations, but you're supposed to have that fully accessible. I know that doesn't happen all the time, okay? So if you're doing videos or even a podcast, audio podcast, an easy thing is to have a transcript. Have everything that you've said in that video, everything in that podcast typed out so the student can access it and read it while they're listening, or they can just read it, period. That's the quick and easy fix. We really want to go beyond that. We really want captioning. And I'll tell you a quick and easy way to do captioning. Does people know how to do captioning? Yes, no, maybe so? Okay, well, look at that. Less is usually best, and then YouTube actually does a great job, well, good job with captioning, okay? YouTube, 3 or 4 years ago, long story short, set up a mechanism where you can import a video and it will put captioning to it. It's not perfect, but it's a good starting point. And these are the quick and easy steps, and this could be a whole hour presentation in itself. But you import a video, you select subtitles, you select the language, you click subtitles, and what it does is it's gonna bring it up and your video's there, and you hit play. And then while it does that, you're able to type in. And when you start typing, it stops the video. Because I know everybody's like, my video's 30 minutes long. Well, number one, you shouldn't be showing videos that long. I'll just say that. Students, learners in general, after 8 to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you're losing them on a video anyway, in the best practice world. I'm not saying don't show videos that long. Try to break it apart if you can. YouTube will only go to so many minutes. I think it's 6 or 8 minutes anyway. But you can type that in there. So when you break videos down to smaller segments, it's not as bad, because I know people are like, I gotta sit there and type all that out. Use your grad students, use your work study students, use your spouse, your children, whatever. Use your means. ODA can't do all this for you. There's just no way. Because I do the same thing, and I have to keep my mind on there. But I'm teaching my students today that do AmeriCorps, we're going to do financial literacy training, so we're trying to do introductory videos. They're only like 30 seconds, so it's a good starting point to kind of train them. It's not as hard as what it sounds. It's really cool when you get used to it, but when you start typing, literally your video stops. You stop typing, it starts talking again. So you get fast with it. If you're a good typer, you can do this in just a few minutes, depending on how long your video is. And then you need to check it, because it's a free service. It doesn't meet all the needs, but it does pretty good for a free service. Because otherwise, then you're looking at real specialized software that's expensive to buy and it's hard to do. And then the last things with it is you can put in your set timings, and then you can revisit it in an hour. So you can stick it in there, and it needs time to process it, and you go back, and then it should be set for you. So everybody can do captioning now? Sure, gotcha. Pictures. Okay. The not happy picture, the happy picture. So which one do you think is accessible?
Right.
You're correct.
Right.
How can you tell which one's accessible? Besides I'm smiling. You can't, unless you are clicking into it. Any pictures you put on any type of presentation, especially if it's going online or somebody's going to be able to access from a student perspective, you've got to put an alt text. So that, think back to your screen readers. So if I'm a student, that screen reader, it's going to say pictures, alt text, anyone. And then for this picture, it's going to say picture. For this picture, it's going to say Dr. J smiling. Because I named this picture Dr. J smiling. So you right click a picture, go down to properties, alt text, and you type in what you want to do. Okay? When Microsoft converted to the latest edition, they wanted to confuse you. So now there's a title and a description. Forget the title, do the description. I don't know why they put title in there, because it doesn't read it. Just makes it work on you. So this is a real quick and easy fix, but make your pictures accessible. Okay, but I don't teach online. My classes are just, we're doing it. Is there a chance a student may get that PowerPoint at some point, or you're sharing information, or you're doing something online with that presentation where it needs to be accessible? Just go ahead and do it. It takes 2 seconds. Confidentiality. Okay, these are some, am I way over time already? Okay, real quickly. Confidentiality, you can't ask a student if they have a disability. You can always just say, go to ODA in general. If I think you have a disability, I don't go and say that to a student ever. And y'all think that's a no-brainer? It happens all the time. Especially when you can visualize and see the disability. No, you do not do that. You speak in general, but you can always recommend, if anybody has accommodation, please come talk to me. Promote disability services in general. You can't be an expert on every disability in the world. I'm not. I know a lot of disabilities, but Asperger's, form of autism. I work with several young people who have Asperger's. They're completely different. You wouldn't know they had the same diagnosis. So you can't even go from that perspective. Seating accommodations. This room is accessible. I do a lot of training. So if you're setting up your classroom, don't put the tables too close together, because what if somebody who does have a wheelchair, can they get through there easily? So you just kind of think from that mindset. There's lots of checklists and information I could provide you, kind of get you in the mode. When you got wires going everywhere and things like that, it's easy, especially you run in the class, you didn't have your coffee delayed, you run the class, you're trying to get things set up, you want to do some group work, it's easy to forget some of these things. When you're doing group activities, think about how these students are going to move into groups. Do you have a student who may have a disability? Are they going to be able, you're sending them all across campus to do different activities. Do they have a disability, a movement disability that could impact? You got to kind of think of those things. You don't treat them any different than anybody else, and you don't give any special treatment, but you just want to make it easier for everybody. In classroom setup, universal design for learning, representation, action, expression, engagement. There's a whole philosophy, a whole system of this. It did start in the architecture world. There's tons and tons of information. So y'all got these. ODA, Think Center, plug in that for Learning Enhancement Center. They got some really cool, it's accessible learning for everybody. Disability is a huge component with all of that. WebAIM does some really good with PowerPoints, with your Word documents. CAST is really good for universal design for a little bit of everything. And then AHEAD, Association for Higher Education and Disability, and we're actually trying to get our Mississippi chapter started back. We would love faculty to be involved in that.
I was asked to address the question of non-traditional students, and so since many of you teach, I'd like to ask you, what do you think is a non-traditional student? How would you describe them?
By age.
Age? So not 18 to 22? Yeah. What else?
Transfer.
I'm sorry?
Like transfer
Oh,
student.
transfer students, sure. That includes second language learners, absolutely.
Parents.
Parents, that they are parents themselves, yes, that's true.
Working full-time.
Hmm.
Military veterans.
Right, exactly. And how prevalent do you think it is to have non-traditional students in our classes?
Very.
Now, I teach entirely graduate students, and so my perspective is probably somewhat different. How about someone who teaches undergraduates primarily? Do you see a lot of non-grad students? And it's different, isn't it? It is somewhat different. They're non-residential students. They don't live on campus. They may own their own homes. you pretty much nailed all the descriptions. They have, family responsibilities. Not only are they spouses or have significant others, but they're parents of children, and many of them are in what's called that sandwich generation, where they're caring for aging parents and they have children of their own, and they're sort of running back and forth trying to keep everything together. They often have commitments in the community because these are the people who are the scout leaders and the Girl Guide leaders, and they have church commitments, they have commitments, to different community services. So they have a lot of that. They often are the people providing the majority of their family's income. And their enrollment in university is either delayed or interrupted. And so it's a different population than, a lot of campus services are set up just to meet. So non-traditional students, they add the role of student to an already rich and complex life. And I remember being an undergrad myself many years ago and being asked, how can you be married and go to university? Now, I've been listening to this young woman complain to her friends, and I said, well, I don't have a little brother that won't let me study. And she just didn't really understand. A lot of these students are geographically situated. They're immobile in some ways because they own homes, they have children in school, they don't want to live very far away from parents that they're caring for. So they can't necessarily go on study abroad tours, they can't necessarily relocate to go to university. And they come to us with a lot of different motivations. Some of them may have reached a point in their careers where they realize that they can't progress without some kind of university credential. They've accomplished a lot, but they can't go anywhere without a degree. Some of them are in the situation where they have learned that without a degree that there's not many job options, and you can only work at McDonald's for so long before you realize there's not much future. And so that's another reason. Some of them come because of family disruptions. So divorces, separations, death of a parent, loss of a job, all those kinds of things may prompt the return to school. And then they come to classes that are fairly youth-oriented, and a lot of their classmates are residential 18 to 22-year-old students, and they find themselves answering all of your questions and realizing that their classmates haven't done the reading. We've all been there, right? Where you sit there thinking, did anybody read the assigned readings? And there's one person in the room who has, because it's the adult student. A lot of adult, non-traditional students come to class uncertain of their abilities. They may be successful in other parts of their life, but they're coming into a new environment and they're not sure they're competent. And the literature shows that they actually tend to be more successful because they're paying their own money to come to university, or their employer is paying for them to come. And so therefore they're beholden to someone to be successful. And they've figured out where they're going in life, and so they have a goal and they're committed, and they do tend to be the ones that do a lot more of the work than undergrads who may have other motivations going on in their lives. So this is a population that is growing, and depending on the university, for a regional university like ours, it could be anywhere from nearly a quarter, to 65% of the student population. At the community colleges, it's even a larger group, of course, because a lot of people come into developmental education and then progress. The undergraduate population, the traditional undergraduate population, is a shrinking population. And some of our students who are taking their degree in higher ed work in the recruitment areas of this university, and one of them was telling me the university is going to have to stop being myopic. They're going to have to look at a broader view of who to recruit on campus, because the undergraduate finishing high school population is a shrinking group. And universities tend to be a little behind the curve. We all know the wheels turn a little slowly at the university, and the students come and the business office is open when? 8 to 5. They come to class, some of them come only at night. They need to pay their bills, they have to take time off work. There are universities that have student support services specifically for the non-traditional student. Actually, Jones County Junior College has a non-traditional student support center. And other universities in the nation have non-traditional student support centers. They're accessible after traditional business hours. They facilitate all the things that students need to do, registration, paying their bills, all that kind of thing. They help them with those things. At this point, we don't. Now, there's even a non-traditional Greek society. I've forgotten its Greek letters at the moment, but there is a non-traditional student society that provides scholarships even. And I sent the information up to Dr. Paul, our Vice President of Student Affairs, but I'm afraid I didn't receive a response, so maybe I need to bring the topic up again. Because if the university had a chapter, non-traditional students could join and would be eligible for those national scholarships. Oops, wrong thing. Oh dear. Okay, this is what happens when you don't hit the right button. So students who come to us from, not from high school, but from other worlds are committing acts of courage and hope by coming back to university. There's a lot of risk in learning new things, and students need to unlearn things that they've strongly believed. So their first act of hope is by entering the university, just making the commitment to come to school in the first place. And if you watch too much TV like I do, you may have caught this little video, which I quite like.
This is a woman hesitating on a life-changing decision. At University of Phoenix, we know going back to school is a big decision. That's why we offer students new to college a risk-free period so you can commit to your education with confidence. Get started at riskfreephoenix.com.
But did you notice the crib? The child's toy that she tripped on when she was dancing, and there was a crib in the corner, and she doesn't want to wake the baby, but she's making the decision to come back to school. So they make that. Each semester a student comes back to us, they are renegotiating things in their own life that they have to navigate in order to come back to school. They need the support of their families, they need the support of faculty, and they need to believe in themselves and believe in the fact that the university will be of benefit to them, because they often come back with very specific goals. Another thing they're negotiating is the change of identity that occurs as a part of learning. And so they're negotiating the meaning that they're making from their personal experiences and matching that up against what they're learning from us. And, then looking to see how that jives. Now, I was talking to my class last night, and I said before I took organic chemistry, I really didn't have any preconceived notions about organic chemistry. I mean, when I graduated from high school, I thought they made up chemistry to torture people because it's something that didn't make a lot of sense to me, and I think I wasn't the benefit of skilled teachers of chemistry. But I did pass organic, took a lot of work, and when I took textile chemistry, guess what? It made sense because it was applied to something I understood. But a lot of subjects that we do teach, students already have ideas about. If you teach politics, if you teach sociology, if you teach history, people have beliefs when they come into your class, and they're hearing what you're saying, matching that up against what they already believe and think they know. And they may have to do some negotiation against what you're telling them, and they may have to rethink some of the things that they think they already know. And a lot of learning works that way, I believe, is that we come in with established meanings. We meet new information that either augments what we know, contradicts what we know, or provides more nuance in what we know. And so that process is ongoing. And finally, another act of hope that students are making, they're renegotiating their identity, they're gaining a sense of place within the university, and they're establishing a sense of self that fits within the world of higher education, within the cultural norms. So there's some concerns students bring with them. The first one is, do I belong here? You know, am I capable? Can I do this? And I find even with graduate students, their word processing skills are deficient in some cases. Some of them are very skilled, and some of them have no confidence in saying, okay, now you need to upload this assignment to Blackboard. We say this as if it's so simple, but if you've never done it, it's not so simple. They also feel a sense of otherness. If they're in a very youthful classroom and they're the only adult, they tend to feel, they question how they fit. They also have to realize, work on developing their skills to become academically competent. And self-reliance and persistence is very important to academic success. Now, this is something that's important for all students, but think of being an adult student with all the competing demands on your time. And, some students come blessed with very supportive families, very supportive employers, and some do not. Some have family members that actively sabotage their efforts to improve themselves. And some of them, tend to not understand and not be as supportive as one would hope. And the other thing, we all know that the children, first of all, they know the moment we're on the telephone and not paying attention, and that's when they start becoming noisy and climbing things and so on. It's also when they get sick. When the tests are due, when the assignments are due, is also when children tend to become sick. So they have all of those competing things going on. Hopefully they meet an environment where we value the personal maturity and the active engagement and the knowledge that our students bring with them to class. So there's things we can do. The first one, and I think these things actually are useful for all students, but particularly with non-traditional students, be really careful with your assumptions. You may assume that your older students are not as capable. Usually that's wrong. You may assume that they're not going to be committed, and that's often wrong, but they may be distracted given everything else. Each of our students is an individual. They come with different motivations, different knowledge, different capabilities, and different emotional approaches to studying. Particularly with your non-trans students, they value if you form an authentic relationship that's rooted in what we're both there to do. I mean, the relationship is rooted in being a teacher and a student, but if you can be authentic with those people and real with those people, they will value that very much. I think listening and paying attention and asking good questions goes a long way to understanding what motivates our students. And it requires us to be flexible and accountable, because certainly with the students that I teach, they have a lot of things going on in their lives. And so last night one student was saying, I'm not going to make my assignment on time because I just learned my mother, who lives in Cameroon, has advanced stage 4 cancer, and we're trying to get together as a family to see what we can do. Well, what do you say in those situations? I mean, my syllabi tends to bark a lot harder than I ever bite, because my syllabus says official things like, for every day late, I'll take off 3 points and so on. Obviously, in this case, I did not imply that kind of penalty. And I just said, there are times when family comes first. Do what you need to do, and we'll work on the timing. So finally, I think, here's this guy who's graduated, he made it, he's obviously not a traditional student, and I was struck by one of the things that Michael Adams said in his outgoing speech as president of the University of Georgia. Students know whether you care about them, whether or not you're there to serve them. And I think that's true. I mean, students know when we're committed to their success.
I took this a little differently. I approached this from my belief that teaching is a little bit like a secret society. That teaching is a little bit like a secret society. That what we do is often done behind closed doors, and a lot of people don't know what we're doing. And so I kind of reflect on what I do and hope to share that with you, and then that would prompt some discussion, and especially for those people who are just entering the profession might be very important. But it seems to me that there are three kinds of, that what we're talking about today is adaptation. How we adapt our classes to our students. Adapt them to people with disabilities, how we adapt to classes to older students, non-traditional students. And it seems to me that there are three kinds of adaptations that we engage in. The first I'll call essential, because we're required to do it. We're either legally bound to do it, we're administratively bound to do it, we might even be morally bound to do it. And for the most part, that's what we heard about earlier. This is fairly easy to do in some sense because we're talking about learning disabilities, hearing impairment, pregnancy-related conditions, things that are the students self-identify. They go to an office on campus and they provide documentation that they have a disability, and that office provides instructions to us as faculty that tell us how we're supposed to adapt to that. How many of you have gotten an ODA letter? Has everybody gotten an ODA letter? For those of you who don't, it's just a matter of time. You'll get a letter from a student that says that they are to be given extra time on taking a test, that they're allowed to take a test in a space that's space that's confined, so it's not as noisy. Who said that one? Anyway, these are fairly innocuous requests. Some people might find them inconvenient, but remember that it's only inconvenient for us that these people have to deal with disabilities their whole lives, so only temporarily inconvenient for us. But the real clinker is when you do have more significant accommodation requests, and hearing impairment is really the one that should be most concerning, especially if you use lots of videos in your classes. And I do, and about a year and a half ago, I got the request that I got a hearing impaired student, and got the request or the instructions that I was supposed to provide transcripts for everything we show in there. And I probably used 30 to 40 videos. They're anywhere from 10 seconds to 20 seconds, 2 minutes, but some of them might be 50 minutes. And I didn't find the YouTube closed captioning as useful as you might have. In fact, I found the YouTube closed captioning to be more confusing than better off not to show them what's there. Now, supplementing it works, no doubt, but just what's naturally provided there is not sufficient. So I hired an undergraduate student to transcribe all the videotapes, the recordings. I've been teaching the course for a number of years, so I knew exactly what I was using. But I adapted that every week, every day. There would be a consideration of whether I'm going to use that video. So there's sometimes where the students were, I was late getting the transcription done because I planned to change it. But nonetheless, if you find yourself in that experience, in that situation, go to your chair, get some help because you can't do all the transcribing yourself. It's just impossible. So if the accommodations are burdensome for you, find some help, and we're obligated to do it. And I think chairs will help you find the resources needed to do that. The only other thing I would say about that is that all of us should take a look at our course objectives in light of possible accommodations that are coming our way, because the accommodations office is going to look at your course objectives and see how the requirements of your course fit that. So if you have an assignment in your class that may present some difficulties if they are changed by the ODA office, and those assignments don't relate to your objectives, then they're going to want to know why. So if you require a speaking assignment in your class, and that's not part of the objectives of your class, and you have a student who has speaking difficulties or hearing impairment the ODA office is not gonna understand why you have something, why you might oppose changing an assignment because it doesn't fit with the request is not consistent with your objectives. So take a look at your course objectives in light of that. The second kind of accommodations or adaptations that I do are what I call routine. And these are things that are done based upon the generic categories of race, ethnicity, gender, age, veterans, athletes, sororities, Greeks, any kind of groups I can find that students belong to. And this means I do two things. One is that I try to do things in my class that relate to the groups that are in there. And then I also try to bring things into my class that might not be reflected in the groups that are in the class. So I noticed that Lilian's Lilian's slides had different people of different races. One of the slides had somebody with a wheelchair, and those are intentional adaptations. They're selected to make sure people know that there are other kinds of people than what we're talking about in the class, or that you may be familiar with. So I think that's very good. It doesn't depend solely on who's there. So I adapt the images, I adapt the examples, sometimes I adapt the assignments, and sometimes I adapt the classroom interaction to reflect that. And that means that you can ask questions about race and gender and ethnicity, but you don't ask people to be representative of one. I don't ask somebody what black students think about this or what women think about this. I ask the question, but don't be offensive about it. Don't be stereotypical. And for me, the bottom line is that we do no harm. Basically, what we're there to do is to broaden their perspective and to relate to the students, not to perpetuate conventional stereotypes and embarrass people. So make sure that in those kinds of adaptations that you do no harm. The third kind of adaptation I think that we do is the most critical, and in some ways it's the hardest, and that's where we adapt to the individual's unique characteristics, their interests, their values, their commitments, and their experiences. Not everybody who belongs to a particular group has the same characteristics as everybody else in the group. And so what we need to do is figure out and know more about the individual perspectives and background and experiences of our students. Now, that's really difficult to do. I mean, whether you've got 13 or 30 or 200 in a class, it's really difficult to get to know everybody. So this is ideal. It's idealistic, but I still think that if we try to do it, everybody in the class will benefit from that. And so how can you do it? Well, one thing you can do is you can come to class early. I know that some people like to get there on the buzzer, on the bell, and start as soon as I get there. I try to get there early. I'm not always good at this. I would like to be better at it. But if you come to class 10 minutes early every day, you're going to learn something about your students there. And at first it might be awkward. At first it might be you don't know what to say to these people, and you don't have any commonality with a 17-year-old or 18-year-old who's a freshman. But after a while, something will happen, and you learn more about your students by simply being there. You learn to ask them questions. You learn to simply observe and listen to what's going on, and that can be informative. And how can that be informative? There are things that I do with that information in my class, so that, for example, I have individually directed questions. In my nonverbal class, we talk about touching and tipping by waiters. And I know that there are waiters and waitresses in my class. And if I listen to them beforehand and find out about their part-time jobs, I'll find out who that is. And so when we talk about that, I'll ask them, do you have a policy on touching at your restaurant? Have you ever had an experience of people getting upset with you touching? Or does it occur naturally? So anyway, I can ask individually directed questions. I can also, there are times when we have to do flexibility with our rules and assignments, like Lilian was just referring to, and offer people assistance for outside of class. And the last thing I say about this is support. That we can use this information to support that student in their endeavors, in who they are and what they're doing. So for example, last spring in my nonverbal class, I had a softball student. Now, it's been years since I've been to a softball game. It's been years since I had a softball student in my class. But I went to this first softball game, or the first softball game that I could. And of course, there weren't more than a dozen or so people there, so she could see me there. She knew that I was at the game, and from then on, I could talk to her about, her games and what she's doing and how she's doing and whatnot. And not only does she see that, but the other athletes in the class see that. There were football players in that class as well. And though I wasn't football season, they could see that I was interested in who they were. They were a student athlete, and that so it has some residual effect there. I have frequently have people who sing in the choir, so I'll try to go to a choir performance. If I have a thespian, I'll go to the theater. But these are things I like to do anyway, so it works out well. But I know that even in a class of 30, you're certainly not in a class of 250. You can't go to 250 different things. You don't even know that about everybody, much less able to do it. But if you try, everybody kind of gets the message that you're the instructor who cares about people and what they do and what they're like. And just by being able to talk to them, you don't even have to go out and do it, but just by being able to talk to them, you're able to relate to them and support them in their endeavors. So the bottom line for this, though, I think, is that whatever you do has to be transparent, has to be over and above the board, it has to be consistent across students, and it has to be equitable. You don't want to be giving unfair treatment to students because they're in the band or because they're in the symphony or anything. So to kind of protect yourself, just make sure that everybody's aware of it, and you do have to adapt the rules, but you still have to be consistent and fair and equitable about it. So that in a nutshell is what I do. I hope that it relates to what you do. Tell me later, so I'll be confirmed in this. If it's not, I'd like to hear what you do.